In this video, I'm going to share with you 4 concepts that will help you become far more anti-fragile. According to Nassim Taleb, there are things which are fragile, which are, for example, a vase. If a vase is on a table and it falls off, it will shatter. And if it shatters, it can't go back to becoming a vase. Obviously, there are Japanese principles as far as putting the vase back together, and that's beautiful as well. But fragile things get worse when trauma occurs. Then he talks about resilience, and resilience is things that can overcome challenges. But just being resilient does not mean you actually get better because of traumas or challenges or obstacles. Nassim Taleb talks about how things that are fragile, the opposite of being fragile is not being resilient, where you just can endure challenges. The opposite is anti-fragile, where you actually continuously get better and better and better because of challenges. He actually uses the example of, I think it's the Hydra in Hercules, where if you chop off one head, 3 more pop up. And so things that are anti-fragile not only can handle obstacles, they get better and better and better because of challenges. And this is really how evolution and adaptivity work, is when you're dealing with obstacles, you actually get better. And anything that does not adapt and get better gets weeded out. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share with you an interesting quotation from Nassim Taleb about anti-fragility. And then I'm going to share with you 4 powerful, exciting, very practical concepts for how you can become more anti-fragile. So as he says, some things benefit from shocks. They thrive and grow when exposed to volatility, randomness, disorder, and stressors, and love adventure, risk, and uncertainty. Then down below, the anti-fragile loves randomness and uncertainty, which also means crucially a love of errors, a certain class of errors. Anti-fragility has a similar property of allowing us to deal with the unknown, to do things without understanding them, and to do them well. Let me be more aggressive. We are largely better at doing than we are at thinking, thanks to anti-fragility. I'd rather be dumb and anti-fragile than extremely smart and fragile at any time. So you want to be anti-fragile. As a people, as a species, we want to be anti-fragile. We want to take things like COVID as an example and get better as a result, not worse. There's a great concept in psychology these days called post-traumatic growth, which is another example of anti-fragility. And in order to have post-traumatic growth, what that means is that you actually take any form of trauma from your past and you believe, you see that you're better as a result of it. A core aspect and something that boosts post-traumatic growth is where, first off, you have to think about the traumatic event. Journaling is a beautiful way of doing that. You think about, you journal about it, you first off come to realize that you define the meaning of your own experiences. And so this is not one of the 4 concepts. I'm just explaining to you anti-fragility and also post-traumatic growth, that something is inherently a trauma because you believe you're worse off as a result. If you have a fragile mindset, and humans can be fragile, we're very emotional creatures, but you are fragile as a human if a shock happens or a trauma happens and you are now worse off. You're kind of shattered as a result. You can think of it similar to being a vase that drops and now you're shattered into 1,000 pieces. That's trauma, is that something bad happened and emotionally you got shattered and now your identity is confused, your identity is messed up, and you have a really hard time emotionally going back to that experience. You feel, this is the key aspect of trauma, is that you are not actually a vase that shattered into 1,000 pieces, but emotionally you feel like you've been shattered into 1,000 pieces and you feel crippled. That's a key aspect of traumas, is that some event happened and now you feel broken, crippled, or disabled in some way because of it. Whereas post-traumatic growth and anti-fragility means that you actually believe you're better because of the trauma. And because we're emotional beings, we have control over this. This is what post-traumatic growth is all about, and gratitude, and learning to define the meaning of our experiences, and learning to be happy and grateful, and to take whatever life gives you and turn it into fuel and purpose for your future. So to experience post-traumatic growth on the regular, you would ultimately want to regularly look back at your hardest experiences. There's a concept called exposure therapy in psychology, which talks about neutralizing the emotion by actually exposing yourself to it over and over. If someone's afraid of spiders, as an example, rather than avoiding, all motivations are either approach or avoid. If you're constantly avoiding things, then that means that you're letting the past dictate your future. And in order to have a future that's based on approach, meaning you visualize the future you want and you then commit and courageously pursue what you want, regardless of the repercussions, in order to have an approach orientation toward the future, you also have to have an approach orientation towards your past, meaning that you happily approach your past, you expose yourself to it, you think about it, you reframe it, meaning you reshape it, you change the story, the narrative, the meaning, the feeling of it. Rather than something that crippled and shattered you, this is actually something that strengthened you, transformed you, and grew you in many ways. And you are very grateful for it. And you express that gratitude. And you now have higher senses of purpose, meaning, growth, and possibilities because of this. In other words, you're better because of this, not worse. You're better, not bitter. It happened for you, not to you. A huge aspect of becoming emotionally mature, emotionally developed, or what psychologists would call psychologically flexible, is the ability to regularly frame and reframe meanings. This is really what cognitive behavioral therapy is all about. You actually look at the past, you reframe it, you reshape it, and you gather more from it. You gain more from it. It's almost like a gold mine. One thing I learned from Dan Sullivan, and we wrote a book together called The Gap and the Gain. And one aspect of being in the gain is obviously gaining more and more from your experiences. But one thing I learned from Dan is that you and I, we don't have access to each other's experiences. You never can access my experience. We can have the same event. We could both be in the same car, for example, that has a car accident. We can both be in the same situation, but neither of us have the same experience. And I can never actually have access to your experience or to the person in the car next to me. I can never actually get access to someone else's experience, and no one can ever have access to mine. And so my experience is my property, as Dan would say. He would even say your past is your property. But I like the idea of experience. And I love the idea that no one has access to my experience. And so I actually get to do whatever I want with my experiences. I can devalue it by saying, oh, that was a bad experience. I never want to think about that again. That was horrible. I wish that hadn't happened to me. Or you can take the experience you have and really think about it. Your experiences are worth so much more than your property. They're worth so much more than so many things if you value them. And if you look at them like a gold mine, but it's not just a stable gold mine, it's actually something that you have creative control over. You can stretch, shapes, expand. You can play with your experiences. They're not fixed structures. They're something you create by how you look at them, by the meaning you give to them. And so you want to look at your experiences, and not only do you don't want to decrease the value of them, you actually want to increase the value of them by learning from them, by continuously getting more and more from them. And so you can continuously go back, learn from your experiences, be grateful for those experiences, and continuously expand the context, expand the story. One of my favorite quotes, and then I'm going to go into the four steps of becoming anti-fragile. But there's a book called Time and Psychological Explanation by one of my favorite psychologists. His name is Brent Slife. And this whole book is about how psychologically time is not how we look at it. Time is not chronological. It's not past, present, and future, and we can never go back to the past. Psychologically, the past, present, and future are holistic, meaning that right now, who I am is based on my views of the past and my views of the future and my experience in the present. It's actually all happening all at once. And when I change my view of the past, I learn from it, then my experience in the present changes, as do my goals in the future. And when I really clarify and rethink things through in my future, when I change my goals, that may also reframe the meanings of my past experiences. And so time is more holistic. We're always living in the past, present, and future all at once. And even with modern research on what's called prospection, everything I'm doing right now in the present and you is based largely on our views of the future. If you have a hopeful, confident, optimistic, very purposeful view of the future, then who you are and who you're being in the present is going to be very different than if you don't have hope towards your future, if you don't have purpose. This is a big thing that Viktor Frankl found. It was his core assessment in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, is that without having a purpose to fulfill, without having specific goals, your present loses meaning. And then ultimately you distract yourself in the present. And this is what modern research on hope shows as well. The whole point here is that the past, present, and future are completely flexible psychologically, and that we have access to all of them at all times. And the goal of being anti-fragile is that every experience that happens to you, you become increasingly flexible, anti-fragile. Everything happens for you. You have increased meaning, purpose. You're learning from your experiences, but also you're utilizing your experiences, you're valuing your experiences, and you're continuously mining those experiences for more and more. So this takes us to the first concept of how to become more anti-fragile, and that's to learn everything you can from your valleys and to not squander your peaks. One of my favorite books of the last few years is called Peaks and Valleys from Spencer Johnson. Spencer Johnson wrote the book, Who Moved My Cheese? I actually think Peaks and Valleys, which is a far more niche book, not very many people have read it. It is a masterpiece of a book. But his core premise in Peaks and Valleys is that the bad things that happen in people's lives happen because of the errors and the mistakes that they make while they're on their peaks. And the good things that happen in people's lives happen because of the things that they learn and the things that they ultimately do in their valleys. Now, a peak and a valley can be situational. Certainly, if you're on a growth trajectory, right? You're making a lot of money, more money than you've ever made, or something like that, or things are going really well. It can be very easy to become arrogant, overconfident, or just to stop applying the fundamentals that actually got you to the peak. And there's another great concept actually from Gay Hendricks. He wrote a great book called The Big Leap, and he has a concept that explains this idea of when you're on a peak, you make a lot of stupid errors that ultimately create unnecessary valleys. And that concept that Gay Hendricks presents is what he calls the upper limit problem. And it's more psychological. It's the idea that as human beings, we all have a thermostat. Emotionally, subconsciously, we have a thermostat. And even Dr. David Hawkins said this. He said, your unconscious, by the way, is your thermostat. And if you have a view of yourself unconsciously of being someone who's poor or unworthy of love, it doesn't matter how many good things happen, you're going to subconsciously pull yourself down to your baseline or your thermostat. And so obviously you're going to have to evolve the subconscious to get to the point where subconsciously you believe you deserve everything on your peaks and be above. And so the upper limit problem happens when you start seeing lots of growth or benefits, or you're making key progress in certain areas, whether it's in your, in love or in finances or in health or in spirituality. You're making key progress, but emotionally you've never actually adapted your baseline. You don't believe you deserve everything. So what happens is you ultimately reach a place where you're seeing all this good stuff happen, and then honestly, you subconsciously self-sabotage yourself to pull yourself back down to the baseline. And so Spencer Johnson's idea of the problems that happen in your life happen because of the dumb mistakes that you do on your peaks. And I could admit this. I've had huge peaks in my life, and I've also squandered a lot of those peaks. I've made lots of mistakes that cost me lots of different things, whether that's money, relationships, growth, opportunities. And so the core premise here, again, from Spencer Johnson, is that the bad things happen in people's lives because of the dumb mistakes that they do on their peaks. And it's not necessarily that they're dumb. It's just psychologically, emotionally, they're not learning from it. They're not ready to stabilize that and then ultimately keep expanding toward a bigger vision. And instead, they get lackadaisical, overconfident, arrogant, etc. And life is in waves. Even light is in waves. Everything happens in waves. And so you can't expect that a peak is just going to always be there. You got to actually learn from it and then ultimately keep growing. If you're not growing, then you're going backwards. And these are ways, obviously, to become more anti-fragile, is to not squander those peaks, to learn from them, to stabilize, and to continue. You ultimately, as people, and this goes back to Frankl, is that you ultimately always need a future purpose that's giving you meaning. Frankl was very explicit in this. He said, what people need is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal, a freely chosen task. Frankl even would regularly quote Nietzsche, who said, when the why is strong enough, you can bear any how. He also said, though, and this is more on like hope research, that when the why is strong enough, you will find the how. People who are high commitment, high hope, they have what's called pathways thinking, where they will find, generate, and create unique, novel, nonlinear. They will find and create a path to get where they want to go. If the why is strong enough, you will find the how. You will find the path. Valleys are the best thing that can happen to all of us. And a valley doesn't have to be situational. You may situationally be miles and miles beyond anywhere, even your best situations 5 or 10 years ago. But for you right now, this is a valley. This is something you're learning from. This is something that's tough. And you're forced to be humble. You're forced to become better. You're forced to not be bitter. You're forced to look in the mirror. And so if you can learn from your valleys, if you can learn from the situation, and if you can maintain agency, which is a key aspect of hope, if you can realize and have what would be called an internal locus of control, like, yes, things seem like they're caving in. Yes, things are challenging. Yes, things are tough. And I just admittedly, as we're filming this video, I'm in a bit of a valley. My life is really great. Like, I've got a great life, but I'm in a bit of a valley where I'm being forced to learn some hard lessons. And if I don't learn these hard lessons, things will keep going downhill for me. And so, but if I can learn these lessons, and this is, again, one of the key points in Spencer Johnson's book, that what you do in your valley, and if you can utilize it, and if you can learn from it, he says, again, the good things in people's lives happen because of what they do in their valleys. And I invite you, the listener or the watcher, to think about this. Think about the great things in your life that have happened because of what you ultimately learned and what you ultimately did, what you chose to do and what you committed to do when you were in a valley. It could have been of some sort. Even me, myself, when I was 11 years old, my parents got divorced, and it was a deep valley for years, all through my high school years. But I ultimately did turn those valleys into massive peaks. huge post-traumatic growth, huge sense of meaning and vision and purpose. And this is a key psychological principle, is that your past and how you feel about it has almost nothing to do with what actually occurred. It's more about the story you tell. When you get better at telling better stories and collecting better meaning, and when you value your experiences, when you value and approach your past, you will, and this goes back to the nonlinearity and the holisticness of time, by continuously learning from, being grateful for, and approaching and learning your past, telling a better story, your future goes up. Your future just gets bigger and more purposeful and more meaningful. That is post-traumatic growth. You will have a bigger sense of purpose, mission, and meaning as you take whatever experience happens. And so this is the key psychological principle, is that to be happy in the present, you ultimately need a positive past and a compelling and exciting future. Having a compelling and an exciting future and a positive past, which you're grateful for, which you're learning from, which you highly value. You see it as worth more than rubies and gold. Even my most challenging experiences, I value them so much, because if you think about life from a spiritual perspective, your experiences are really what you have. Time is simply the culmination of experiences. And the person who learns the most from their experiences gains the most from their time. A person who goes through a great deal of time, but without actually gaining and valuing their experiences, their time is thin compared to the thickness of time from someone who's deeply learning from every experience. The quality of time, not the quantity of time, is what matters. And the quantity of time is based on how much you value and learn from your experiences. Cultivate your valleys. Obviously, we're all going to make mistakes and we're going to squander future peaks, but try not to squander your peaks. Learn from them. Recognize when you're on a peak and use it to stabilize for future peaks, knowing that, yes, you're going to go into valleys. We all go through ups and downs, and the valleys are ultimately gold mines when you realize them for what they are, because they do invite you to look deep. They do invite you to get better. They do invite you to be more anti-fragile. They do invite you to think differently. Sometimes a valley is the best thing that can happen to you. It's kind of like someone who loses a job, as an example. Like, they would have held on to that because it was their comfort zone, but now they're forced to actually think things through on a much higher level. It does force you to think more critically. It does force you to explore different and better options. It does force you to face hard truths in the mirror, maybe let go of things that you've held on to. And this takes me now to principle number 2. Principle number 2 of becoming more anti-fragile is to raise your floor. Raising your floor is a very interesting perspective. The idea here is that all of us as people, we've got a ceiling and a floor. Your ceiling is your current potential. Your ceiling could also be you and your best right now. Like, for example, and you can look at your ceiling as your potential, not only in a given day, but also just as a person right now. And by the way, as people, our potential is always changing, because even in a week from now, you'll have different potential, because you will be a different person. You'll have a different situation. You'll have different friends. You'll have different opportunities, but you'll also have different knowledge, different experiences. And so your potential is not fixed as a person, but your ceiling is basically a reflection of your best right now. And that could be represented in the best of your day. Like, you could have a ceiling for your day where it's like you wake up, you had 8 hours of sleep, you get up, you go to the gym, you have your great morning routine, you accomplish the best things. And you may have a clear idea of what a ceiling day looks like, at least right now. But you could also look at your ceiling in terms of your overarching potential. But your floor is just as important, because your actual average is between your floor and your ceiling. So you got a ceiling, which is amazing. You've got things that you're doing really, really well, but then you have your floor, which are basically the worst parts of yourself. And between your floor and your ceiling is your average, which is basically who you are and the results you're getting. And your average is lower than your ceiling by far, because of your floor. And your floor are the things that you do that ultimately sabotage yourself. It could be sitting around wasting time. It could be, as an example, you might have this insane ceiling for your physical fitness, but you don't stop, but your sleep's not very good, or your eating habits aren't very good. And so your floor is just the things that you're doing that are ultimately pulling that average down. But if you actually eliminate the floor, or if you pull the floor up, then your average goes up. Let me give an example. We live in an internet world. And so a big part of people's floors is just mindlessly wasting time on the internet. And I'm not above this. And so one way you can raise your floor, and there's lots of ways you can raise your floor. I'm about to share with you a few principles on raising your floor, but one way you can raise your floor is setting parameters. So for example, on my phone, I've set it so that my my Safari app only allows me to use it for 20 minutes a day. In the past, I would catch myself mindlessly doing stuff on the internet for 1 or 2 hours, which is no different than a few years ago, people just mindlessly watching television. And so if you set parameters, it's like, I've just raised my floor enormously, because I just went from an hour to only 20 minutes of basically mind-numbing entertainment. But there's other ways of raising your floor as well. Think about financially. Like, you may be investing great amounts into your future, but at the same time, you might be like still frivolously spending on trash. And I'm not against obviously having fun, but you may have huge holes in your boat that are sinking your ship, because this is your floor. And so obviously you can create accountability systems structure. I love the quote from Alcoholics Anonymous that all progress starts by telling the truth. This goes back to learning from your valleys, honestly, is just fully owning where you're at. There's a great quote and a similar quote in addiction circles, which is that you're as sick as your secrets. You're as sick as your secrets. As people, we're as sick as our secrets. And so in order to raise your floor, the sooner you just come out and own the truth, all progress starts by telling the truth. And then ultimately getting accountability and support systems around you. As an example, as an entrepreneur, one of the things I've found, like, I love the idea of an accountant, because accountant, like, it's the idea of being accountable. And about having accountability systems and you create those systems based on your own, where you're wanting to go, based on your future self, based on what you're wanting to achieve. And so right now, just as a simple example of me raising my own floor financially, is that me and my wife are, first off, meeting with a therapist just to have great conversations. I think it's healthy for everyone to have different coaches, different people. So one is just ongoing, open, regular communication and clarifying vision and goals, but also being accountable, having systems where all parties who are involved, and if you're just involved with yourself, at least being honest with yourself, but you should have other people, even just having an accountant or having a coach or having a team, whatever it is. But then working, for example, we're getting a new accountant who's much better at like tax strategy and stuff like that. And also having different systems in place where maybe on a monthly basis, we're tracking income and expenses, and those things are just continuously tracked, where it's like, yeah, this is what's going on. It's just being more accountable. And you can raise your floor. I mean, you can raise your floor about the dumb mistakes you make. We all make dumb mistakes that pull us down or away from where we want to go. I actually love the quote from Robert Brault. He said, "We're kept from our goal, not by obstacles, but by a clear path to a lesser goal." That lesser goal could be anything. It could be jumping on social media. It could be wasting your time. It could be even a good thing that's ultimately pulling you away from what you ultimately want. I love, love, love the quote from Peter Drucker. He says, "Do first things first and second things not at all." He says, if you're going to try for doing both, you'll end up getting nothing done. So you have to know where your priority is. You have to know where you value, what your mission, what your purpose is, and then eliminate all lesser goals, even great things, things that maybe have been exciting to your former self. You eliminate the things that are not within your priorities. And as Jim Collins would say, if you have more than 3 priorities, you have none. You clarify what are the few essential things in your life that you're going to invest your best energy and your best effort into, and who cares what everyone else is doing. And this actually takes me to principle number 3, which is all about slowing time down. Time actually is a qualitative resource. Time is about the quality of your minutes, hours, and days, not the quantity. You could have an enormous quantity. 10 years can go by and you really don't experience much. Time at a fundamental nature is about quality, not quantity, the quality of what's happening. One thing that's really true, one thing that's important to note, time will speed up dramatically if you have no clear purpose and priority. Essentially like a ship without a rudder, and you're triggered and pulled in all sorts of directions, your time will go very fast because it's low quality. It's thin time, it's not thick time. And so one thing just always to note in a world that's constantly bombarding us is that the world is not going to stop spinning. The news cycles are not going to stop spinning. Instead, actually, it's only going to speed up. There's going to be more and more things to capture your attention. And I love the quote from William James. He said, "There are millions of items in the outward order. There are billions of things going on outside of me, which I don't even notice because they have no meaning for me. There's no purpose." I've talked about this a lot, but selective attention is everything. Whatever you focus on expands. Whatever you focus on, you create. Whatever you focus on, you become. And so a key aspect of slowing down time is to not have your attention pulled in so many different directions, but actually you eliminate almost everything from your filter. You realize the world's going to keep spinning, but you actually choose to be what would be called strategically ignorant. You actually choose the filter and say, and that's really a big aspect of decisions, that you cut off alternative options. You say 99.999% of what's going on in the world is just going to speed up my time. It's going to confuse me. It's going to muddle my attention. I'm going to realize that the world's going to keep speeding up. There's infinite things on the news cycles, infinite forms of entertainment, infinite opinions, etc. And I'm going to close all that down. I don't need to be worried about that. I'm going to be in way more flow. And in order to be in flow and ultimately to become anti-fragile, you have to have clear goals and objectives. Back to Frankl, what man needs is not a tensionless state, but the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal, a freely chosen task. To be in flow, you've got to have a clear goal. You've got to be pursuing things that are outside your comfort zone, which requires courage and stretching. What you're actually trying to accomplish is above your skill ratio. And then immediate feedback, meaning consequence, that you will get consequences for your actions, and hopefully you learn from those. That's taking experiences and valuing them and turning them to your gain, turning everything to a gain. Everything allows you to become better and more anti-fragile. And so if you have clear goals, if you're constantly living in a flow state, meaning you're pursuing those goals above and beyond your current skill set and dealing with immediate feedback, dealing with high consequences and actual challenges to what you're facing, and you're anti-fragile, meaning you're continuously applying the principles of post-traumatic growth, where every experience you increase the value, you get better and better as a result of it, then you're living in a much higher quality realm of time, where every single day you're pursuing something meaningful, but also you're not so scattered and pulled about. Time can slow down. You can achieve more in a day than you used to in a month because your time got thicker. It's less thin. It's more of a higher quality, more valuable. What you're doing in that time is actually valuable. Ryan Holiday and Robert Greene, they have a similar principle to this. They call it a live time or dead time. I would call a live time thick time. Like, it's actually thick, meaning it's really meaty, like it's valuable, like it's deeply quality. Whereas dead time is time that you really didn't get much value from it. You're never going to remember it. There's nothing to pull from it. There's no assets or wealth that was developed from it. Just as an example, this time right here, I'm filming this video. I now have an asset. I have a video that is going to be evergreen. It's going to serve me forever. And that's a different approach to time, where you're actually creating wealth. And wealth isn't just physical assets or even digital assets. Wealth is knowledge. And so if you actually learned from something or you built a connection, that's a lifetime, that's thick time, that's quality time, where now you actually are qualitatively different and better. And so that's really about slowing time down, which is actually making progress towards where you want to go, expanding your experience, creating wealth, which is creating assets, which could be creating value, doing work, doing something, or learning. Wealth could be also knowledge and skills or relationships. Slow time down. Let the world keep spinning. Let it spin faster. Let people get caught in the web of distractions. I love Cal Newport's work, Deep Work, about how this is an age where if you actually can focus being the IQ of the 21st century, if you can focus, we have the tools available to us to become successful very quickly. The problem is that those very tools are landmines. They can web us into distractions, and those distractions take us down deeper and deeper rabbit holes to extreme paths that ultimately destroy and confuse our identities and throw us down paths we didn't want to go. So the very tools that, if you can control your mind, if you can focus, and if you can be purposeful, can take you very far. Those same tools can destroy you. It all depends on your priority, your focus, and the use of your time and experiences. The fourth and final principle for becoming anti-fragile is to continuously apply exploring and exploiting as ways of learning and ways of being in flow. There's a model that says you're either exploring something where you're actually striving to go out and get new perspectives, expose yourself to new possibilities, maybe new opportunities. You're always exploring, but at the same time, you're exploiting. And exploiting is about focusing and taking advantage of the opportunity right in front of you. You're actually committing to something and you're working. And so that's more about being in deep focus. Like, you're committed, you're focused, you're doing your work, yet you're always giving yourself space to explore new things that are next. You kind of want to have a good balance of this, where you're always exploring new options, yet you're exploiting with purpose what's right in front of you. And the word exploit can seem different because it seems manipulative, but it's really just about taking advantage. It's about focusing. It's about committing. It's about being purposeful. And I look at flow as both of those things. That flow as a model is about focus. And so you want to be in deep focus flow, but also this would be more of like a recovery flow where like you're in a form of recovery being like replenishment, rejuvenation. When you're out traveling, you're seeing new things, which is actually really enlivening. And so you want to always be exploring new options while exploiting with power and with commitment, with focus, what's in front of you. And if you have a great model for this, for using your time, where your time is spent going deep, focusing, creating something of value, but at the same time, you're constantly learning, constantly expanding, constantly gaining new perspectives, new insights. You're not just stuck in a rigid way of living, although you can focus, you can commit. This is also the difference between goal and process, that people have a hard time being big picture, like in terms of like the bird's eye view versus the worm, like, right? Like you want to focus on the tree in front of you and chop it down, but you also want to keep zooming back and seeing the forest and continuously seeing more and more of the forest, what's out there. And so this is exploring and exploiting. And I think people have a huge weakness in their ability to undulate between both of those, where regularly you're exploring, you're learning, you're expanding. At the same time, you can sit and you can get in the focus cave and you can go boom, boom, boom. You can create deep work. You can complete big projects, but at the same time, you're expanding, you're broadening the vision, you're seeing what else is possible. I hope this was a valuable video. I hope you enjoyed it. Down below, there are links to various free resources. My name is Dr. Benjamin Hardy. Please like the video if you enjoyed it. Down below, you can opt in for the peak state checklist, a morning routine checklist that's been downloaded almost 1 million times. There's also, if you're in the United States, PDFs or Kindle versions of 2 of my books, Be Your Future Self Now and The Gap and the Gain, which is a book I published with Dan Sullivan. Have an absolutely amazing day. See you later.